Hello viewers, today we are going to study about the poet Pindar and his poem Olympia. Pindar was an ancient Greek poet. In ancient Greek, he was known as Pindaros and is pronounced in Latin as Pindarus. He was born in 522 and died on 443 BC. He was an ancient Greek lyric poet from Thebes, of the canonical 9 lyric poets of ancient Greece. His work is the best preserved. Quintilian wrote, "Of the 9 lyric poets, Pindar is by far the greatest in virtue of his inspired magnificence, the beauty of his thoughts and figures, the rich exuberance of his language, and matters of his rolling flood of eloquence, characteristics which, as Horace rightly held, makes him inimitable." His poems, however, can also seem difficult and even peculiar. The Athenian comic playwright Euphilus once remarked that are already reduced to silence by his disinclination of the multitude for elegant learning. Some scholars in modern age also found his poetry perplexing, at least up until the discovery in the year 1896 of some poems by his rival Bacchylides. When compared to their work, showed that many of Pindar's idiosyncrasies are typical of archaic genres, rather than of the poet himself. The brilliance of his poetry then began to be more widely appreciated. However, his style still challenges the casual reader, and he continues to be a much admired, though largely unread poet. Pindar is the first Greek poet to reflect on the nature of poetry and on the poet's role. Like other poets of the archaic age, he has a profound sense of vicissitudes of life. But he also articulates a passionate faith in what men, by the grace of the gods, can achieve, most famously expressed in his conclusion to one of his witchery odes, which reads, "Creatures for a day, what is a man? What is he not? A dream of shadow is our mortal being, but when there comes to men, a gleam of splendor given of heaven. Then rests on them a light of glory, and blessed are their days," which is taken from Pythian 8. His poetry illustrates the beliefs and values of archaic Greeks at the dawn of the classical period. The figure of the poet assumed a new role in the 6th and the 5th century BC under the influence of city-based economy, which was encouraged by colonial expansion and by the possibilities of trade opened up with the circulation of money. The poet achieved a higher social position in connection with his role as praiser of rulers and communities. The poet and the subject of the poem became connected by a precise relationship of the commission and remuneration. Money could buy a place in posterity, and the notion that poetry mediated between the memorable achievement and the deserved glory is a recurrent motive in Epicean poetry, especially in Pindar's Epicean, where the consciousness of his own poetic talent assumes an attitude of vigorous pride. The poet's song spreads their legacy ever further through the community and into the future. In that way, Pindar argues poems were superior to other popular medium of praise. The statue which transmitted is the message only to those who could see it. The Epicenian form, which in Simonid's hands seems to have evolved into a relatively simple poem of rejoicing enhanced by touches of realism and humor, was assimilated by Pindar to the religious hymn. The praise and worship of the god whose festive is being celebrated set the tone, and thanksgiving is an integral part of the structure. A second constituent element is the myth, impressionistically treated in a series of sharply visualized scenes and meant to link the glorious present of the yet more glorious past, and to give a new dimension to the transient moment of victory. Pindar used stories from the epic tradition of the local oral tradition, choosing the episodes most appropriate of the ceremony for which he was composing, and then explicitly connecting the persons, the family, and the city or divinity to be celebrated. He emphasized the heroic achievement most relevant to the occasion while omitting other aspects and episodes of the story. The third element that we find is the aphoristic moralizing, that is, often in Pindar, resulting in passages of extreme beauty, even sublimity. Aphorism linked the present reality with the mythical narrative and repeatedly stressed the dangers of excessive pride in achievement. The emotional impulse stems from the aristocratic ideal of self-assertion, competition, and leadership, an ideal expressing itself most finely in battle but also finding fulfillment in athletic contests, in which the palm goes to superior physique and morals believed to derive from superior birth and the favors of the gods. Pindar's metrical range is exceptionally wide, with no two poems being identical in meter, and he controls difficult and inevoluted techniques which consummates professional mastery. His dialect is literary and eclectic with Boeotian elements, that is, the vocabulary is enriched, poetic, and highly personal. Each poem is fused into a unity by the fire of Pindar's poetic inspiration, by a sweep and soar of imagination that gives his poetry power and magnificence, and by the shaping and controlling disciplines of the factitudes and expressed in an intensely personal style. One distinctive trait in Pindar's poetry is the piling up of desperate topics, that is, which unexpected and are sudden transitions. These at first seem to be unmotivated digressions, apparently unconnected. Such episodes, which came to be known misleadingly as Pindaric flights, are rapidly associations of ideas, sometimes expressed very concisely, which when carefully examined are shown to be intelligible. The more enduring difficulty of interpreting Pindar's derives from the fact that his poetry was composed for special occasions and is rich with references of persons, places, mythical figures, and historical events that were known to original audience but are obscure for modern readers. Nonetheless, careful evaluation of the ancient testimonies can provide useful indications. Delphic religious teaching found in Pindar a real pupil, and he constantly spiritualizes his materials, turning away from the cruder traditional stories of the gods, avoiding the mundane details of the contest, and striving to catch the fleeting radiance that plays about the moment of supreme endeavors. When a man transcends his own limitations of physique and character, and so proves worthy of his birth and ancestry. Delphic also profoundly influenced a style which is frequently cryptic and oracular. He regarded himself as the muse prophet. Pindar's fellow poets, although very different from Pindar in background and temperament, shared with him a deep religiosity, a groping towards something more profound and satisfying than contemporary cult could offer. A profound from abrupt and violent transitions in thoughts and mood, and a forthright pungency of speech. A somewhat muted epithet preserved in the Greek anthology describes Pindar as the servant of the muses, welcomed by strangers and beloved by his fellow citizens. Pindar's odes make great demand on the modern reader, and it is only in recent times that his art has begun to be appreciated for what it is. Even so, much essential evidence is missing. The musical settings that he composed to accompany his words are lost forever. Though in view of the quality of the poetry, it is probable that the words dominated the setting. It is therefore impossible to recreate, even in the imagination, the approximate sound of the Pindaric ode, or indeed to reconstruct visually the appearance and constitution of the choir. How many participated? What range of voices was employed? Whether the singers were static, moved in procession, or danced? These are questions that cannot now be answered, nor is it possible to picture at all clearly the festive occasion that was the background for the poetry. Yet efforts were made to understand the odes, which are rewarded by at least a glimpse of the poet behind them. The aristocratic society and standards, which meant everything to Pindar, were dead or dying. But in his art, he recreated them, giving them new and permanent existence and value. Pindar cannot indeed speak across the centuries with the directness of Homeric epic poetry or the Sophoclean tragedy, but he does create with disciplined mastery of a sophisticated complex art form, a choral lyric of unsuppressed splendor and sustained nobility. For Theron of Agricosa's chariot race, which was held in 476 BC, songs, rulers of the lyre, what god, what hero, what man shall we celebrate? Indeed, Pista belongs to Zeus, and Hercules established the Olympic festival as the finest trophy of battle, and Theron must be proclaimed because of his victorious four-horse chariot. Theron, who is just in his regard for guest and is the bulwark of Acrigarius, the strength of the city, the choicest bloom of his illustrious ancestors, who labored much with their spirits and won a sacred home by the river and were the eye of Sicily. Their allotted lifetime attended them, bringing wealth and grace to their inborn excellence. But you, son of Corneus and Rhea, who rule over your home on Olympus and over the foremost of the festivals, and over the fraud of Alpheus, be warmed by our songs and graciously preserve their ancestral land for their future generations. When deeds have been accomplished, whether justly or contrary to justice, not even time, the Father of all things, could undo the outcome. But forgetlessness may come with favorable fortune. Under the power of noble joys, malignant pain is subdued and dies. Whenever God-sent fate lifts prosperity on high. This saying applies to the daughters of Cadmus on their lovely thrones. They suffered greatly, but their heavy sorrow collapsed in the presence of greater blessings. Long-haired Simonil, who died in the roar of the thunderbolt, lives among the Olympians. Pallas is her constant friend, and indeed so is Father Zeus. And she is loved by her ivy-crowned son. And they say that even in the sea, among the ocean daughters of Nereus, immortal life is granted to Enos for all time. Truly for mortal men, at least, the time when we will reach the limit of death is by no means fixed, nor when we will bring a peaceful day, the sun's child, to an end in unworried well-being. But at various times, various currents, both of pleasure and of toil, come to men. In such a way does fate, who keeps their pleasant fortune to be handed from father to son, bringing at another time some painful reversal together with God-sent prosperity, since the destined son met and killed Laius, and fulfill the oracle of Pythos, spoken long before. But the sharp-eyed Erineus saw it and destroyed his warlike sons, though mutual slaughter. Yet Polonius, when laid low, left behind him a son, Tysander, honored in youthful contests and in the battles of war, a scion of defend the house of the descendants of Adrastus. And it is fitting that the son of Anicedemus, whose roots grew from the seed, should meet the song of praise and with the lyre. For in Olympia he himself received a prize of honor. At Pytho and at this Isthmus, the Graces, who loved them both, brought garlands of flowers of his equal blessed brother for his 4-horse team. Victorious in the 12 courses of the race, to attempt a contest and be successful brings release from sadness. Wealth adorned with excellence brings many opportunities, rousing deep wild ambitions. It is a brilliant star, a man's true light, at least if one has and knows the future, that the reckless souls of those who have died on earth immediately pay the penalty. And for the crimes committed in these realms of Zeus, there is a judgment below the earth. With hateful compulsion, he passes his sentence. But having the sun always in equal nights and equal days, the good receive a life free from toil, not scrapping with the strength of their arms the earth, nor the water of the sea, for the sake of a poor sustenance, but in the presence of honored gods, who gladly kept their oaths, enjoy a life without tears, while the others undergo a toil that is unbearable to look at. Those who have persevered 3 times on either side to keep their souls free from all the wrongdoings follow Zeus rode to the end, to the tower of Corneus, whose ocean breeze blows around the islands of the blessed, and the flowers of gold are blazing, some from splendid trees on land, while water nurtures others. With these wreaths and garlands of flowers, they entwine their hands according to the righteous counsels of Rhadamanthus, whom the great father, the husband of Rhea, whose throne is above all others, keeps close beside him as his partner. Peleus and Cadmus are counted among them, and Achilles, who was brought there by his mother, when she had persuaded the heart of Zeus with their prayer, Achilles, who laid low Hector, the irresistible, unswerving pillar of Troy, and who consigned to death Memmion, the Ethiopian son of the dawn. I have many swift arrows in the quiver under my arm, arrows that speak of the initiated. But the masses needed interpreters. The man who knows a great deal by nature is truly skillful, while those who have only learned chattered with raucous and indiscriminate tongues in vain, like crows against the divine bird of Zeus. Now bend your bow towards the mark. Tell me, my mind, whom are we trying to hit, as we shoot arrows of fame from a gentle mine? I will aim at Agrigas and speak with true intent a word sown by oath. No city for 100 years has given birth to a man more beneficent in his mind or more generous with his hand than Theron. But praise is confronted by greed, which is not accompanied by justice, but stirred up by the depraved man, eager to babble and to bury the fine deeds of noble men. Since the sand of the shore is beyond all counting, who could number all the joys that Theron has given others? Pindar's poetic style is very distinctive, even when the peculiarities of the genre are set aside. The odes typically feature a grand and arresting opening, often with an architectural metaphor or a resounding invocation to a place or goddess. He makes rich use of decorative language and florid compound adjectives. Sentences are compressed to the point of obscurity, unusual words and periphrases gives the language an esoteric quality, and transitions in meaning often seem erratic. The images seem to burst out. It is a style that sometimes baffles but also makes his poetry vivid and unforgettable. Pindar's power does not lie in the pedigrees of athletes. It lies in a splendor of phrase and imagery that suggests the gold and purple of a sunset sky, which was written by F.L. Lucas. He has the force of imagination which can bring clear-cut and dramatic figures of gods and heroes into vivid relief. He has the peculiar and inimitable splendor of style, which, though sometimes aided by magnificent novelties of diction, it is not dependent on them but can work magical effects with simple words. He has also at frequent moments a marvelous swiftness alike in the succession of images and in the transitions from thought to thought. And his tone is that of a prophet who can speak with the voice of a Delphi. This was commented by Richard Culverhouse Jebb. The stanza begins with a celebration of divine power. and then abruptly shifts to a darker, more elusive train of thought, featuring condemnation of the renowned poet, that is, Acroleus, grown fat on the harsh words of hate. Acroleus was an iambic poet working within a genre that licensed abusive and scurrilous verses, a regrettable tendency from the viewpoint of Pindar, whose own persona is intensely earnest, preaching to Hyrene the need for modernization and submission of the divine will. The reference of the embittered poet appears to be Pindar's meditative response to some intrigues and Hieron's court, possibly by his rival, condemned elsewhere as a pair of ravens in Olympia 2. The intensity of the stanza suggests that it is the culmination and climax of the poem. Myths enabled him to develop the themes and lessons that preoccupy him, in particular mankind's exalted relation with the god via heroic ancestors, and in contrast, the limitations and uncertainties of human existence. His mythical accounts are edited for dramatic and graphical effects, usually unfolding through a few grand gestures against a background of large, often symbolic elements such as sea, sky, darkness, fire, and mountain. Pindar's ode typically begin with an invocation to a god or the muse, followed by the praise of the victor and often to his family, ancestors, and hometown. Then follows a narrated myth, usually occupying the central and the longest section of the poem, which exemplifies a moral while aligning the poet and his audience with the world of gods and heroes. A lot of modern critics try to find hidden structures or some unifying principle within the ode. In 19th century criticism, which favored the nomic unity, that is, each ode is bound together by the kind of moralizing or philosophic vision typical or archaic nomic poetry. Later critics saw unity in the way certain words or images are repeated and developed within a particular ode. For others, the odes are just celebration of men and their communities, in which the elements such as myth, piety, and ethics are stock themes that the poet introduces without much real thought. Some conclude that the requirement for unity is too modern to have informed Pindar's ancient approach to the traditional craft. The great majority of the odes are triadic in structure, that is, stanzas are grouped together in threes as a lyrical unit. Each triad comprises two stanzas identical in length and meter, and a third stanza differing in length and meter but rounding off the lyrical movement in some way. The shortest ode comprises a single triad. The largest comprises 13 triads. 7 of the odes, however, are monostrophic. The monostrophic odes seem to have been composed for victory marches or processions, whereas the triadic odes appear suited to choral dances. Pindar's metrical rhythms are nothing like the simple repetitive rhythms familiar to readers of English verse. Typical, the rhythm of any given line recurs infrequently. Example, only one every 10 or 15 or 20 lines. This adds to the aura of complexity that surrounds Pindar's work. In terms of meter, the ode falls roughly into two categories. About half are in dactylic epitaphs and the other half are in aerolic meters based on iambs and choric iambs. I hope you have enjoyed the session. We have learnt about the poet, the poem Olympia, the poetic style and the structure of Pindar. See you in the next session.